It is now recording. So I wanted to start off tonight by asking you, first of all, did you find the groups that I had put you in? Okay. And you know that you can go in that side tab that says groups and users, and you can contact just your group through that way. We did have one that had not attended any of our classes that has re-enrolled, and I put that person in one of the groups yesterday. So now all of the groups have 5 in them. So that should be a good group to work with. And then you all will decide how it is you're going to split up your assignments and peer reviews and that kind of thing. So the first thing I want to do you have any questions that you want to ask related to the last 2 weeks of anything that we have introduced or that you've been working on? Okay. This is just a reminder, and I don't think it's for any of you because I think you've already turned yours in. But for week 2, you were either to tell me who you wanted to work with, or you were to say that something like, I don't have anyone that I know that I wish to work with. The reason for that, it's an easy way for me to give you 50 points. And if you don't do that, you're losing those easy points. And somewhere down the road, you may need those points. So just make sure, and like I said, this is for those who are not on here most of the time. Make sure that you do go on and fill those out. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do tonight then is to introduce task 2 of the APSL. So let me see, I think I have it ready to share. So for task 2 of the APSL, and if you'll just follow along with me on this, you are to research all available data in your school to determine the most pressing learning need. And once you have collected the data, you are to convert to a presentation form, and you are to lead your PLC in isolating the key data and creating or selecting visual graphics that effectively represent the need. This is good to record the session, and you can save it, and that way you can use it as evidence of various competencies such as leadership, delegation, communication skills in your competency folio. Now remember, competency folio is where you put your evidences. The task that goes with the APSL, which is task 5, is where you are reflecting on, and you do not have to include the evidences, but you need those evidences to go in your competency folio, and Dr. Bullis will be working with you more on that. Any of the data that you use must have students' names or any identification of the student removed. You can name them student A, student 1, you can give their ages, but you don't need to list their names. You should consider diversity in the need that you're identifying. So task 2 has 2 prompts. Prompt 1 is where you describe and give data collection strategies and criteria in the process of identifying the most pressing need. You are to lead a collaborative meeting where you are analyzing the data and you're discussing it. So this is where your PLC that you just identified and created will come in to play. You will conclude the session by agreeing on a specific need that your data has shown. We are recommending that you videotape this so you'll have the competency folio evidence. But in the actual directions, it says it's optional. But many of you would rather go ahead and get as much done as possible so that you have it rather than have to go back and do it with something else. So that's prompt 1. Prompt 2 is where you're graphically presenting the data that you have talked about and you're still doing narrative with it, and you're doing it in the forms of charts, tables, graphs. The visuals are to be used to illustrate and support the data analysis and show why you came to the conclusion that you came to. So that is the two parts, or those are the two parts of task 2. Now, to get a 3, which is proficient, you have to have the description of your data collection strategies and criteria in the process of identifying the most pressing need. You also have to have data that's graphically represented in the narrative in the forms of charts, tables, graphs that are going to illustrate and support your data analysis and the conclusions you came to. You're also going to provide evidence that you effectively can lead a collaborative PLC meeting where data is analyzed and discussed, concluding with the identification of a specific need or needs. Now, how might you do that? Well, part of that you can videotape it, but you can also have an agenda. You can have a PowerPoint, or you can put the charts in various forms so that you talk about them. And the data can be in various forms. So that's some of the ways you can come up with your evidence. Now, to score a 4, which is accomplished, you have to have all the things above, and also you have to be able to show something that evidence demonstrates academic needs assessment and a strong PLC that exceeds a proficiency rating. Now, while that is a little bit non-specific, in other words, it just means that you're really showing that you know what you're doing and that you're able to lead a group. So some of the helpful hints that came from Dr. Stedman for prompt 1, and I know you're working on that as well this week, the subheadings. Again, I told you this is not the time to be creative. And Dr. Stedman put in, okay, when you're doing that first part of the prompt, just call it data collection strategies. And this is where you're working with your PLC team, and you're determining the strategies that you're going to collect the data and determine the most pressing need for improving student achievement in school where you are interning. Now, there's many ways of looking at what an important pressing need is. So that's what you and your team have got to come up with. Now, most people, when they think about pressing need, they're going to look at your data, your end of class data, your end of grade data. They may look at attendance. They may look at many different sets of data that you have. They could even look at discipline records. So if you are in a non-traditional school, that's where the things other than just test data may come in to help you determine what your real issue is that you're dealing with. But even in those non-traditional schools, there should still be data that you have that you use to make some decisions about whether a student is on grade level, above grade level, below grade level. And so, you know, you use the data that you have, and then you decide what your most pressing need is. For example, if you're in a school and the reading scores are much lower than the math scores, then your school-wide area of need is going to be something related to reading, most likely. You're going to have to look at different grade levels and see if it's the same throughout the grade levels. I know when I was a principal and assistant principal, we would have one grade level that would be really high in, say, science, and another would be really high in social studies. So you had to look back to see what was being taught the year before and the year after, and what was that set of teachers actually teaching the curriculum they were supposed to teach. So there's so many things that go into it, but if you can find a need that is across the board, then that's what you're looking for. And then the next subheading would be the process and the criteria for identifying the most pressing need. In other words, what did you all decide, and how did you decide that? What was the criteria that you came up with to help you identify your most pressing need? And then the third one was your collaborative data analysis. And so that's where you're disaggregating the data. You're looking at the groups and the subgroups. Your narrative for this section will also discuss the process. Now, if you're in North Carolina, a lot of that information can be found or on the school report cards because they often gave the data by subgroups. So I'm sure South Carolina has something very similar. Now for prompt 2, you are to graphically represent the work that you presented in prompt 1, and you're to use charts, tables, and graphs. These visuals are to be used to illustrate and support the data analysis and conclusions. Don't forget, it's got to follow APA, and APA tells you exactly how to label and how to identify your figures, graphs, tables, and charts. And I believe that each one of those needs a title. And so it will tell you where the title needs to go and how you label, whether it's figure 1 or table 1 or whatever, but follow APA. And then all of the graphics needs a narrative explanation telling what's being represented. Again, that's some helpful hints from Dr. Stedman. At the end of the total task, you will have a page where you will put your references. Again, follow APA for how to cite references on a reference page at the end of your document. Now, you will do this for each one of the tasks, but when you put it all together, you're going to move all of these references and put them in one reference page at the end of your paper. So it will look like a research paper that you did for English in college. So it will flow all the way through, and you'll have your narrative insert references, but then you will have your page of references at the very end, and those are always in alphabetical order, and APA tells you how to do that as well. If you choose to create any appendices, then they would follow the references. So once you complete the whole task, you're to schedule a meeting with your principal or leadership team, and you're to present what you found. Now, I went ahead and came up with, because this is called a needs assessment, I went ahead and went online and found some definitions that I think may be helpful to you, and some of the foundation concepts that go with needs assessments. And so basically, it's a set of procedures where you use to determine what the need is, and you look at the causes, and you look at the priorities that you're going to set for future action. And you conduct these to help, and the program planners is going to be your set of people in your PLC, but also in your school improvement team, to identify and select the right job before doing the right job. So that's what you are, that's just a simple definition of a needs assessment. And what should be included, one of the groups says the report should include a summary of the why and how the assessment was completed. See, that's a lot of what task 2 is asking you. And the methods you used, who was involved, that was in task 1. And then the training recommendations with a general timeline. And so that you will get to, but you're not there yet. You just have to identify the problem right now. And so there's also some more concepts that go along with this, and this is just a summary. A need is a discrepancy or a gap between what is and what should be, and that's a simple way of looking at it, but that's all it is. And then the desired results minus your current results, that indicates your need. And you can have needs in lots of areas, but you're looking for the one need that you feel that your school has the biggest area of need or improvement in. And we've already mentioned that it's a systematic set of procedures used to determine the needs, examine their nature and causes, and set priorities for future action. And this we know is very true. There's never enough money to meet all needs, so the needs assessments are conducted to help not program planners, but the school identify and select the best way of teaching the people that you're working with. And then here's a few more definitions that are going over the same thing. And then here's some more information that's a summary. There's no one correct needs assessment model or procedure. And see, a lot of what you're being asked to do in this task is simply identifying and going through a needs assessment. They mention it, but they don't actually come out and define it that way. So this is some information that for you to read through, and you will be preparing a written report. And there's two other terms that you're going to run across and that you're going to be talking about in other, further on down in this particular evidence: gap analysis and the school improvement plan. And the gap analysis is what you're looking for to try to identify what your need is. So, you know, where are your gaps? Is it with certain groups? That's the reason you look at subgroups. So what can you do to narrow down and pick out the one need that you might have the most effect on? Now, one of the things that I have always encouraged people to do is do not make this too big. Make it something that is actually doable. So if you've got so many needs in your school that you identify, pick one that you actually think you can make a difference with. And then the school improvement plan. The purpose of a school and or a district improvement plan is to guide the school and district improvement problem solving and planning process throughout the year, and help identify and organize strategies and resources that's going to lead to increased student achievement at your school. So there's the plan for success, the process to execute the plan, the technology to support it and to measure the results, and then the long-term commitment to implementing it. And that's what Pinellas County Schools has said about their school improvement plans. Now, Dr. Bullis, would you like to add anything else before we go on to another topic?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Todd. There are just a couple of points just from past experiences. I'm not saying that operations and facilities doesn't have a place in having a positive impact on student learning and addressing certain needs and gaps in your school, but now's not the time to address that. You know, I've had candidates in the past talk about redoing landscaping or getting the gym refloored. And, you know, like I said, that certainly has value, but we just want to really focus in on an instructional need that you identify through this needs assessment. Looking at discipline, looking at some of those other data, attendance, course EOG and EOC scores, NC check-ins if you're in North Carolina, or some other type of benchmark assessment or formative assessment that you are using could be some really great data for you. But we want to address a learning need and an instructional need that you identify. And doing that, it's easy to go into this type of conversation with the bias, especially if you've been in the school for a while. The scores were just approved. Last year's test data was just approved by the State Board of Education, so I know everybody's looking at that, and you're already probably having conversations about what your data from last year is showing. But try not to go into it with the bias. You may have certainly have a mission and a purpose for your PLC team, and you may have a general direction that you want to go in, but don't miss out on the chance to really have some good conversations with your group, to have some collaborative discussions based on what you're looking at in front of you at the table at that time. Because you looking at it and looking at some and maybe identifying some gap is one thing, but don't discount the values and experiences that your teammates are bringing to the table too, because they may have a different perspective or a different lens that they're looking at it, and you might really identify something that may have fallen under some other people's radars and really have a good opportunity and have a lot of potential for having a great impact on your school. So really spend time in that professional learning community, having that conversation, and really have some in-depth discussion about your data. That's the way you can get to that column 4, past proficient, and getting that 4 score, showing that strong leadership as really narrating and showing the conversations that your team had and the discussions that you had and how you facilitated those discussions to identify that gap. Thank you, Dr. Todd.
Thank you. And he brought out some really important points. And there's one other thing that I thought of as he was talking about. If there have been people that have been in your school for a very long time and they have always looked at the data, they may have a preconceived idea. And if you have a new teacher that comes to your school and they're looking at it for the first time, they may see something that you haven't seen before. And so, you know, he's right. It is collaboration, and each one of you that you've selected for your group should be looking at and talking about this data that you're actually examining to see what you can come up with as what you feel is one need that is the biggest and something that you can have the most effect upon. All right, does anyone have a question that you'd like to ask either one of us at this time? All right, Amy?
I had trouble with citation for the APA style with the school report card. So I used the guide, I think that Dr. Bowles had suggested for us, but it didn't seem to, there's no author to that, so it gave kind of the website back and it gave some dates and things. But do you have any other recommendations for how to cite even the North Carolina report card?
Okay, I think I heard most of what you were asking. I think you would probably, if it came off of the internet, you're going to use the sightings for the way to find an internet one. And so, you know, that would be where you would start with that and looking under the section for APA for how to cite using internet. Dr. Bullis, you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree with you, Dr. Todd. I think the APA manual addresses using websites and using the URL address as your reference point. And I think if you follow that, especially in something like the North Carolina School Report Card, where there's really not a single author or a group of authors, it's a report from what the state's collected. So there is a certain degree of flexibility that goes along with that. But just check under your APA for properly citing a web address and just using the URL, I think would be fine.
That answer your question, Amy?
Okay. I think I was making it harder than it is.
Sometimes we do that. All right, does anybody else have a question? Okay. All right. Like I told you last week, we will go back and look at some of the readings that you have done for the last 2 weeks. And we talked last week and talked about what PLCs were, and that was your reading from the first week. But there was also some information in chapter 2 about leadership skills or forces. So I want to just briefly, I want us to talk briefly about these, and I want you to please respond. Sir Giovanni listed 5 leadership skills or forces that's available to principals as they facilitate professional learning communities. And see, you've got to think in a really broad range when you think about professional learning communities. If you're the principal, that community has got a bigger base than what you are thinking about in your small PLCs. But they say that those 5 skills are technical forces, human forces, educational forces, symbolic forces, and cultural forces. So how do you see those skills or forces in your current schools? How do you see those in your current schools?
Okay, I got a little something.
Megan, go ahead.
When it comes to the symbolic forces and the personal values, I think that my current leadership, my principal, has really tapped into the community and to the values of the community. And we've tied it into PBIS and MTSS and what we call it Jet Pride. Our mascot's the Jets. And so we've infused that pride into just everything that we do. You know, we hand out little cards to the students, and it's gone so far as in the community, a lot of different businesses, when you see their commercials on the news, they may even say, we also have Jet Pride, come and see us on the car lot, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's one way that we've really tapped into the symbolic forces of what's happening in our community.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else have something to add about some of the other different forces, or even the same forces that you're using, your school is using?
We've started using the Leader in Me program at the school that I'm at. So this is our second year of, I guess I should say, incorporation with that material into our lessons. And I feel that's really started to help with the morale with not only the adults in the building, but also the students, and really starting to get everybody involved in becoming 21st century learners and leaders. So I feel like for us, that's more of like a human force, but also a little bit of a symbolic force, because we're trying to teach those skills that weren't necessarily being taught before we started that Leader in Me program.
Very good. Somebody else want to share something your school is doing that exemplifies some of those forces at play?
Ours is more the cultural forces, the building traditions.
Okay.
We try to instill into our children, you know, excellence and success, and just, I mean, letting them know, you know, you are at the best school, and it's more like a purpose-driven in the morning on announcements, a message, a motto, things like that.
You're trying to instill pride and character in them and wanting them to be at your school. Yes. All right. Anybody else? Okay.
Yes, Jonathan.
Okay.
I'm on the phone here. At our school, we truly took the first 2 weeks, and just thinking on the human side of it, we took the first 2 weeks of our instructional time, and we focused on our mission statement. Where at Invest Collegiate, we imagine, we nurture, we value, and most importantly, we champion opportunities in leadership and learning. And we call our students champions, not necessarily students, but they're champions, because we want them to champion their own opportunities in their learning and take leadership and own that. And so we have built in within our schedule each morning a leadership opportunity for an hour. So we focus on our mission statements, where we focus on those skills that build leaders, and also help them find their skills. Our ninth grade students will be taking a Strength Finders assessment shortly to help find their top strengths. And so our whole entire staff actually did that as well. So really focusing in on embodying our mission, what our school mission statement is, and then also bringing it home for not just our teachers, but also for our students.
Okay, that's very good. Somebody else had their hand up. Was it Jenny?
Yes, ma'am. I was going to say our school is really also trying to focus on some of the cultural forces. Our senior class has recently been faced with a lot of tragedy. Over the past 4 or 5 years, they've lost 6 to 7 students. So we're just trying to get that senior class, because it affects all the other classes, to just build tradition and make them want to be together instead of focus on some of the negative that they've all experienced. And we're doing that with things like we have school-wide tailgates before the football games, where if they just come out, they don't even have to go to the football game, just come before, and they eat dinner for free. And just kind of make them want to be a part of the school and see that it can be a happy place and that they're not always surrounded by the negative that they can't necessarily help with the tragedy that they've seen over the past few years.
And that's important that you do that. And Crystal is at a soccer game, and she said it's really loud. But she mentions that human forces is a big factor, both good and bad. They have good ideas, strong ideas, contributing the overall aspect of leadership for our school. And they're also a leader in me school, and so it's positive encouragement while holding them accountable. And then there's cultural forces that they're working on with their mission statement and individual mission statements and school-wide. So thank you. Anybody else have anything you wish to share before we go on to the next question? Did I miss anybody? Okay, of those skills, which do you see being used most frequently? And then which skill do you feel is most important when improving the performance of a school? So which of those skills do you feel is used the most frequently, and which one do you think is most important when you're working to try to improve the performance of a school?
I think those technical forces, that everyday, day-to-day, the procedures and the those things that need to happen. If all those are in place, it's going to take more off of the teachers' plates, so that they in turn can focus more on student performance. Having been in a couple of different schools just in the last couple of years, there was one school that relied heavily on teacher committees to affect change throughout the school. And the more teacher committees that you have, the less you're able to do in your classroom to affect positive change for those students. So I think the more that those leaders are able to get those streamlined in the beginning, that's going to benefit the school as a whole. But they're all very important. So that's difficult to say which is the most important.
Okay. Anybody else? Any ideas?
I feel like for my school specifically, for the human forces, that's most important for us right now, just because we are trying to build leaders in the students and all the teachers on staff. So for us, it's kind of, helping the kids find out who they are and how they can lead others using their talents and things like that, so that it gives them something meaningful to kind of attach to. Because before, I feel like our school didn't have as much direction with the kids. They weren't as focused, so it's really helped them kind of start to realize like who they want to be, and it's really impacted our staff as well, getting their morale up. So I think for us, the human forces is most important right now.
Okay. And Crystal says that in her school, the most used is education, and that's our goals. But she also thinks that the cultural factor is most important, because you're empowering the scholars to affect everything else in the school. And Sarah says she feels that the technical and human forces are the most important, because she feels like teachers will focus on the educational if there are procedures and structures in place. If you can manage and put procedures in place while building relationships with your staff, you can create an effective school climate. And I'm going to give you an example from when one of my children was in school. He was with a group of kids when he went into, I want to say it was 6th grade. That group of teachers, there was a group of, I think, he was in a fairly large school, so there was 4 or 5 classes, and there were either 4 or 5 teachers and that worked with that group. But they did a lot of things together, and they called themselves, they had a slogan that they came up, and it was "We are succeeders," or something similar to that. It may not have been the exact wording, but that group of kids achieved so much that year. And they worked together as a group. And then when they went on to the high school principal said that that was one of the most caring groups of kids that he had come through that high school. And they were just one of 4 other schools that went together for the high school. But still, I think that focus on success, focus on having some fun, because they did fun activities as a group. They would take an afternoon for an hour or so and do that as the whole grade level and not just the class. So I think that climate and that culture that you're building among your students, it makes a big difference when you use it often enough and you're positive enough, and the children actually begin to believe it. And they become successful because you've ingrained it in their minds. And I will tell you that group of students, when they got to 6th grade, changed pretty dramatically, because when they were in 1st grade, I stood outside the door waiting to pick mine up, and I heard the teacher talk about how awful they were. And first of all, my thought was, where's your professionalism? I'm a parent and I'm standing here and I'm hearing every word you are saying. And I also was talking to a child's grandmother that was there to pick up another child. So I'm thinking, where is your professionalism? If 2 of us are hearing this is not good on you. And it really wasn't. But, that was the way they felt about those children in 1st grade. But by the time they got to the 6th grade, those teachers really instilled in them about how good they were. So it is amazing what the difference in the teacher's encouragement and caring and focus can make on a group of students. And that was one of the ones that I saw the biggest difference in the whole time that I was working at the central office, regardless of what my role was. I watched that group go together and how positive they were from the time. But it started in 6th grade. It really didn't start down in K through 5. It should have. They got the basic skills and all, but they got the belief that they were good with that group of teachers working together. So that cultural piece makes a big, big difference whenever you can get the kids to buy in and they know you believe it because you are saying it all the time. All right, anything else before we go on to chapter 3 and just talk briefly about chapter 3? Anybody want to share anything? All right, chapter 3 was decision making, and on page 30, it lists the following elements that should be considered when making decisions for schools. And you're to consider the facts or information that you have about the issue. Have you considered the individuals who will be affected by the decision? And have you considered all options? And will the decision take form? All right, there is a case study that is given on page 43 in your textbook. And it starts off acting like just a routine conversation. But these things happen, and that's one of the reasons I wanted us to go over this in class. You think that it's not going to happen, but it does. If a principal or a superintendent has an open door policy, then it can happen with any parent, with any teacher, with any bus driver. And this happens to be a bus driver. And in case you're on the soccer field and you don't remember the story, or you're in your car, I will briefly go over the highlights of the case study. You have this bus driver, Mickey Felder, who came into this new superintendent. He was a new superintendent. And he came into his office about 10 o'clock one morning. And the school district had about 2,300 students. And this superintendent had only been there 2 months. And the driver comes in and he says, "Chief, we've got a problem on the bus 5 route I drive." So I told him to sit down and ask him what our problem was. And then the superintendent's looking back and saying, "That was my first mistake." He said, "I wasn't the one should have been talking about bus routes. That should have went to somebody else." So then he said, he continued and he said, this is the bus driver, says, "As you know," and of course the superintendent said, "No, I didn't know that," in his mind. When bus 5 begins its route, it soon gets to the grade level crossing at North Thomas Street. Every morning at the time I'm starting out to pick up the children, there's a scheduled freight train that blocks the crossing. And he says, I wait and wait. And what happens is this makes me late to Southeast Elementary School, and that's where I finish my route. And so the principal and teachers are complaining because the kids are reaching school after the final bell. So what I want to do, this is the bus driver talking, is start my route by going in the other direction, the direction that I would normally be coming in at the end of my route. And then I could avoid the freight train because the tracks would be clear and the kids could arrive to school on time. And he says, can we do it? So the superintendent, without checking with anybody to find out whether this is doable or whether it even makes sense with the transportation department, says, well, it makes sense to me, Mickey, go ahead, just tell your riders so they know what's happening. So the superintendent is thinking, oh, I've solved this very simple problem, and he went on with the rest of his day. But it was not a simple problem. Things were not as they seemed. The immediate result was a lot of unnecessary pain, confusion, and embarrassment. The pain involved the superintendent, the transportation supervisor, some of the parents, and ultimately the bus driver. But it was the superintendent who inflicted the pain. And he said the embarrassment was mine only. So the facts came out. There was no regular morning freight train. The school system did have a transportation supervisor. Mickey only changed his route in the morning. The children who were picked up first were left off last in the afternoon. There was an arterial highway on the route, and the route had been structured to provide pickup on the home side of the children, and now they were having to cross the road. So the bus driver was having a feud with 3 of the parents of the children served by his bus. They were the early boarders, and they lived on the arterial highway. So that just gives you an example of what can happen when you don't have all the facts. And in a principal's role, in assistant principal's role, in an assistant superintendent's role, or a director's role, many times you don't have all the facts. And if you don't stop and think and say, let me contact the transportation director, or let me talk to the testing coordinator, or let me talk to the teacher. One of the first things that I always did whenever I talked to parents on anything that they were unhappy about was I said, have you talked to your teacher? Have you talked to the child's teacher? And if they hadn't, I said, well, I will inform them that you called, but I'm not going to talk with you about the situation. You need to talk with the teacher first, and then I will be happy for you to let me know how that goes, but talk with the teacher first. And then if you can't get anywhere there, go to the principal or assistant principal and meet with the teacher and that person. So the important thing to remember out of this whole case study is with the question of where should the decision be made and where should the decision be made. We've talked about it, but just to make sure we emphasize it, where should that decision be being made? Was it the superintendent's decision to make? It was it's the bus. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the bus supervisor as well, because he's the one that's going to know the routes, and he's the one that's going to have all the information that he needs to make a decision on that.
And the key to this is to make sure that you always go back to the person who is over that area. And Crystal and Sarah say that don't forget the chain of command, the transportation supervisor, the bus supervisor, whatever it's called in your system. So, that's where the decision needs to be made, first of all, by you referring back to the people who actually work with that problem day to day. And so the next question is, whose problem is the situation, and should that person be the one making the decision? Okay, why did not the bus driver to go to the transportation person? That's the question I would have. But I will just tell you, when you're a new administrator, these kinds of things can happen to you so easily. People try to use you, and they use your naivety in trying to get what they want. And I don't mean that to sound ugly or to try to tell you that it's something that you don't need to be prepared, or, you know, to keep you from wanting to do it. I'm just saying this to make sure you know it, because you don't want to get caught in those kinds of situations. They're awful to get through, and many times when you first go in a new role, those are the kinds of things that happen to you. Dr. Bullis, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you must have read my mind, because I mean, that case study is so realistic, and stuff like that happens all the time. Don't feel like that you've got to be in so much of a hurry, especially as a new administrator, or that you've got to be seen as I can make a decision. There is no harm depending upon the situation. Nobody was being hurt. There was no crisis. No laws were being broken. That superintendent could have said, you know what, let me check into that. Don't feel like you have to make a decision right then if somebody comes to you wanting something, and they feel that just because it's urgent on their part doesn't mean that it has to be urgent on your part. There's no shame or no lack of leadership saying, well, why don't you let me think about it, or let me check into that, making sure that you've got all your facts. And I used to have an old desk, and on the old desk was like a glass topping to where I could stick notes and see them through the glass. And I used to keep a piece of paper that I had wrote on in bold, to where I could always see it on my desk. And all I said was, who needs to know? And I actually think Jeff Wallace, I think he's the superintendent of Davie County now, shared this with me. And I thought it was a great idea when I was a young administrator. And I'd keep that on my desk. Who needs to know? And that would remind me of every decision that I'm getting ready to make or that I am making. Who needs to know about that decision? Who is that decision going to affect? And maybe should I reach out to them and let them know what I'm thinking and get their feedback to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's aware of what I'm thinking or what direction I may be going, so that way I can reach out to everyone that will be affected and maybe get some good feedback. And had the superintendent done that and thought, well, who needs to know about this? Well, maybe the bus supervisor, the transportation director needs to know. He would have saved everybody a lot of aggravation.
But whenever we have case studies like this in some of your reading, I will pull those out, because like Dr. Bullis said, this stuff happens every day to new administrators and even to administrators who've been around for a while. But you need to always say, well, have you talked with, and to do yourself think, who really needs to know this? Like Dr. Bullis said. Anybody else have anything to add about that particular case study? All right, do you have any other questions that you wish to ask that we've not covered to deal with this week? Anybody have a question? All right, I want to give you some reminders, and then I will show you this week's assignments. The draft of task 1 of the APSL is due. The draft of the cover page and the school profile is due. And there's an assignment related to one of the readings that you'll have that's related to demographics and diversity. So let me stop sharing on this screen. And then let me see if I can get back to, yes, this is where I want to go, to the actual screen showing. This is week 3, September the 10th through 16th. And what I have done, you've got at the top, your topics are PLCs continued, and you've got some of the same reading materials, but you've got new information. Aldridge is the book on current issues and trends in education. And there's a lot of information, and some of it you're going to look at and you're going to say, okay, this is old because look when it was written. But as you're reading it, I want you to look at it from the perspective of, has this already happened in my school system? It's talking about changing demographics and diversity. And I think as you are looking at it, in many of the school systems, those changes have already occurred, or if not, they're very long on their way. And then the 9th and the 10th chapter talks about curriculum, cultural curriculum, multicultural education, and teaching in inclusive settings. So as you get along in this program, inclusion will become a topic that will be of interest to many people. All right, if you'll notice, I put the link for the APSL for Task 1. This indicates its discussion board, so you can actually find it under discussion board, but you can also get it here. I try to put the things that are due that week on that week. So that's the first one. I also added this link. It was not there last time. I added this link because I wanted to make sure you got it done, and then just, keep it filed, and you can use part of it again. Your cover page and your school profile, you can copy and use that over and over in your other tasks not tasks, but the different evidences. And then this indicates that it's an assignment, so the best way to get to it is right here. And it's talking about changing demographics and diversity. And I ask you to compare what they've said to what's actually going on in your school. So those are your actual assignments. And then the agenda's down here. And this is also at the bottom will be posted this particular recording after it gets converted tonight. So does anyone have any other questions? Now, I want to remind you, I'm going to be, I think, unless something changes, I'm going to be out of town Monday through Wednesday. I'll be leaving early Monday morning and I'll get back late Wednesday night. That's the reason for changing your class session from Tuesday to Wednesday night. So this will be a one-time thing. So if something changes and my plans change, we'll come back to Tuesday night and I'll set it at 7. I will send that out on Monday, but otherwise just plan on being Wednesday night. And I think I set it up at 8 o'clock and to make sure that I had time to get home. I do plan to take my laptop, so if you need to get in touch with me, I also will have my phone. If you need to get in touch with me, call me or send me an email and I'll be glad to talk with you. If you get something turned in and I've not got it checked before I leave, that's why I'm taking my laptop. So all you have to do is contact either one of us and we're there to help you. Any other questions for today? Okay. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'm going to, does anyone need to talk with me after I stop the recording? Okay, I'm going to end the meeting and stop the recording, and I hope you have a great week. Good evening.